You are listening to Light-Hearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Cindy Johnson, top-notch copy editor. Hi, Cindy.
Well, thanks. Hi, Jeremy.
Today is December 17th, 2023, and this is episode 256 of Light-Hearted. In a few minutes, we'll hear part two of a two-part interview with Sally Snowman and Jay Thomson. First, I thought we'd go back to something we did in early episodes of the podcast. What has happened on this date in history, Cindy?
Well, Jeremy, a few major things have happened on this date. On December 17th, in 497 BC, the Romans held the first Saturnalia festival.
Yeah, I think that was just a fancy name for a really big party. On December 17th, 1538, Pope Paul III excommunicated Henry VIII of England.
On December 17th, 1835, a fire destroyed 13 acres in New York City's financial district.
On December 17th, 1903, the Wright brothers made the first controlled, powered, heavier-than-air flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina.
On December 17th, 1983, The Simpsons premiered on television with the episode Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire.
And I have one that actually relates to lighthouses. On December 17th, 1825, the first lighthouse at Cape Florida was established. The 1846 tower that stands today is in Bill Baggs Cape Florida State Park in Key Biscayne, Florida. The lighthouse is open to the public, and there's a museum and the keeper's house. Now, let's go to today's interview. We did a longer introduction last week, but let's just recap some things about our guests.
Sure, Jeremy. Sally Snowman is about to retire after 20 years as keeper of Boston Light in Massachusetts, America's oldest light station. As a civilian employee of the Coast Guard, she oversaw tours and managed the Boston Light Augmentation Program, under which members of the Coast Guard Auxiliary perform various functions at Boston Light.
She has also represented Boston Light in numerous interviews and TV shows. She is the last lighthouse keeper in the United States still employed by the federal government, a legacy that goes back 234 years. In 2018, Sally was the recipient of a Keeper of the Light Award from the American Lighthouse Foundation.
I'm going to read an excerpt from the text that was read when she was given the award. Quote, "For her sustained dedication and outstanding achievement at historic Boston Light Station, and for perpetuating our great nation's time-honored light-keeping heritage, the American Lighthouse Foundation is proud to present Sally Snowman with a Keeper of the Light Award." Unquote.
Sally's husband, Jay Thomson, who was a civil engineer, also took part in this interview. So let's listen to part two of my conversation with Sally and Jay now. You know, I was thinking of something I wanted to interject here. Jay, I didn't mean to kind of shortchange you when I started out and I introduced you as the husband of the the last keeper of Boston Light. So let me ask you, could you tell us a little bit more about you, about your background and what led you to the Coast Guard Auxiliary?
My background is I graduated and I was able to take and get into Northeastern and struggle through, but managed to get my bachelor's degree in civil engineering. And I went and eventually worked for the town of Easton, which I'm from, for a year and a half. And then I moved to Plymouth and was with the town of Plymouth in their engineering department for 30 years. And in Plymouth, I got my first sailboat. Then I wanted something that I could get out to the vineyard. So I bought a little 22-foot sailboat, and I decided I would need to keep that in Boston Harbor. So I joined the Plymouth Yacht Club, and one of the members there had a 32-foot wooden schooner that was actually built in Plymouth in the 70s, not by him. And he would cruise the coast of Maine. And I was fortunate enough to cruise the coast of Maine with him. And his right-hand man was one of his classmates, was Phil Godfrey, who was in the auxiliary. And he talked me into joining the auxiliary. And so I've only been in for 33 or 34 years now.
36.
Is that what it's up to? Time flies.
It sure does. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. I knew just a little bit about your background, so it's good to hear that. I'm wondering if you and Dan May ever talk engineering. Maybe you speak the same language.
We haven't had a chance, but we definitely. I have a great appreciation for his understanding in the work that he's done.
Sure. It's like Greek to me, you know. I appreciate anybody who can do this stuff. So speaking of physical things, let me just ask you about the physical condition of the island, of Little Brewster Island. I know there's been a lot of concerns over a fault line, a big crack in the island. So there's that. There's also the issue of rising sea levels and more frequent and worse storms, you know, as we go forward. So, Sally, what do you think about the future of the island itself at this point?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because with Jay and I been out there since 1994, we have seen the island getting smaller. And we used to be able to do winter watches about 50% of the time through the winter. Well, when I first got hired in 2003, so the winter of 2004, I was out there about 65% of the time. And by the time 2013 came around, we were down to about 45%. And I was on watch with an auxiliarist, and a storm came up, and the Coast Guard asked if we wanted to come off. And when we leave the island in the wintertime, we need to empty out the refrigerator, unplug it, take everything out of the pantry, because we don't know when we're going to.
It's like if you have a summer cabin, you know, you just can't shut the door and walk away.
It was only supposed to be a nor'easter, 40, 45 knots, maybe 6 or 7 foot seas. So we said, we're okay. Well, it turned out to be a full-blown blizzard. That's a hurricane with snow. And it was just so exciting. The seas were like 8 to 20 feet, and they'd be coming and bashing the back of the house. And Audrey and I would be running, just with Audrey, come over here, look at this wave coming. Oh, look at this one over here. And then at night, when I was laying in bed with the waves hitting the back of the house, it felt like a vibrator bed in one of those no-tell motel beds.
Yeah. Put a quarter in. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did something really silly. So once the storm, there wasn't any severe damage, just a whole lot of debris that was thrown onto the island, but there was no damage done. Mm-hmm. And so we were delayed 3 days, and we know when we go out, we always bring extra food with us. And the criteria is we have to look at a 10-day period of time to see with the sea state, atmospheric conditions, things like that, to see if it's worth going out there. And so it's only after that is done that we plan to go out. So for us to go out there and then have a storm coming, but it was going to just be a quick one, like a blow through.
Yeah.
And so once I get back back home, I sent pictures to the Coast Guard, and they go saying, "Oh, what are you doing out there?" And I explained to them why we didn't come off. We'd been out there in nor'easters before. We weren't concerned about that.
And the typical of New England weather, it closed in much quicker than anticipated, so they didn't have time to take and get the place ready and shut it down. The opportunity to leave wasn't available.
Right.
So anyway, so that was it. So 2013 was the last winter that I was able to stay out on the island. So that started just our seasonal from mid-April until the end of October typically. And then during the winter, Station Point Olladin in the town of Hull will take me out twice, maybe 3 times a month during the winter. But last year, we didn't have a bad winter on the mainland. But as far as the sea conditions was concerned, it was a no-go. I went 7 weeks without going out to the light. Oh my God. It must have been preparing me for not being able to go out once I'm not on the payroll anymore. So last winter was a dry run for me.
One of the things we used to do when we'd be out there for Christmas and New Year's, we'd actually string lights around the lower gallery of the lighthouse. And of course, with with the clear ones, you could get away with one bulb, but if you wanted anybody to see it, by the time you get down to the blue ones, you'd have 3 or 4 bulbs clustered together, so you'd be able to see it. But that was a lot of fun being out there. It was never warm out on the gallery trying to wrap those lights around, but I think a few people over in Hull enjoyed seeing it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
So what we would do is, because it was so laborious to do that, we would do it shortly after Thanksgiving. So they'd be up there for a few weeks, and then if they weren't ripped down by the wind, we took them down.
We actually had, for a number of years, one of the lobstermen representing their group, they would come up and was probably a 6 or 8 foot diameter wreath with a pair of cross doors on it, and that would get hauled up and tied up on the lighthouse. So it was fun being festive.
Yeah. Well, I put lights up on Portsmouth Harbor Light a number of times and before the Christmas season. I know how cold and windy it can get there to be out on an island, even more so. But going back to the crack on the island, how much of a concern is that?
There's different points of view about that. Before I was even on the payroll in 2000, a friend of mine who had a geology background, we went around the island and took pictures and took measurements and put a spiral book together and gave it to the Coast Guard for like before and afters.
Mm-hmm.
And the crack that you're referring to is between the tower and the fog signal building. And so if you're up at the tower and you look down between those two buildings and look to the right and look to the left, you'll see that there's the stones out to the northeast. You can see the running crack. And if you look down to the right at the tower, you can see this cleaver, Jay, what do you call that? A cut piece in.
Yeah, but what they did, and I think it was 2005, actually I think they started in 94, for erosion control in that area, they put gabions, which are wire mesh with stones. And, they did their job, but it's one of those things you can't just put them there and walk away. You've got to take and come back and maintain it. And, it's been one of those things that has been put off because of lack of abilities to do it.
So that crack that is when you're on a boat and you know where to look, you can actually see the crevice going in there. And so there's been one official scientific research saying, yes, there's the possibility of that cracking and having the fog signal building fall into the sea. If that happened, there's nearly 2 feet between the two buildings, and so with the way the tower is situated, that could be in danger too. So that there's one report saying, yes, this is a reality, and there's another report that says, no, it's been this way for 3,000 years or whatever, and we don't have to worry about that.
So we can leave it at that. We don't know, in other words, and we don't know. These properties are all endangered by their nature, anyway.
Right. An interesting point is the NOAA came out and they actually put a temporary tide gauge at the end of the pier.
Mm-hmm.
A storm disturbed it, and we went to take and see if they could put it back. Because with having tours, it was great because it had a satellite reception, and it would send the ping information back up to the satellites. And essentially what it determined is, since 1929, when the last time they did some serious leveling in the Boston area, that the average tide has come up about 3/4 of a foot.
Wow.
And that's something that NOAA can state in their determination.
That's pretty significant.
So the gabions have fallen down. They brought them out. They did work. We know they did work in 94 or in that ballpark. They did it in 2005. And then they came back again before our 300th anniversary, the people that came back for that second time, I could tell by the way they were working it, they didn't have the finesse that the previous company had for it. And so they've all collapsed. So they look like dead soldiers, these wire things with rocks sitting there. And so right where that crevice is, it's not protected.
It's kind of like working in the beach sand and trying to build a castle. If you don't have enough side slope, if you build it too steeply, it's not going to stay. And they just, it needed more gabions and a gentler slope to be able to stay.
So Sally, it's interesting when you were talking again about, being 10 years old and visiting the lighthouse and kind of dreaming, that maybe you'd be a lighthouse keeper someday. I think you sent that wish into the universe, and it came back to you. It got answered. How many people can say that? But maybe that's the beginning for you. I know you have a strong spiritual. You've had a strong spiritual life in many ways, and you have a strong spiritual connection to Boston Light for sure. There's no doubt about that. So, do you want to comment on that? I know this is something that's very important to you.
Yes, because when I stepped onto the island, it spoke to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that. All I knew is that, as I say now, it's a first love. There was something about the energy, and I didn't know what I was thinking when you're thinking of it. There was just this feeling, and it was like feeling I've been here before. It's like I've come home, without any cognizance of what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get to close that loop until our wedding day, when we went out there and we tied the boat up at the end of the pier, got off the boat, started walking down the pier, and it was like, okay, yes, there's something like I've been here before. And when we got married, there was a restoration project going on, so that there was a blue top over the cistern building. There was stacks of shingles all over the place. And so it's really fun to look at the wedding pictures to see that, and thinking that when we applied for the insurance policy that we needed to have. Jay, why don't you tell me about that?
$1 million insurance policy for 24 hours.
Holy cow.
And we were only on the island for 1 hour. And
yeah.
And the boats that came out, we weren't on patrol. There were 3 auxiliary boats. We had maybe 15, 16 people. And then I had a brother-in-law that was in the Coast Guard. My sister had been in the Coast Guard. And then most of us on the island were auxiliarists, and we still had to get the insurance policy. So that was very interesting. But the thing is, there was no other cost to the wedding. So that was the big cost.
Yeah.
And so then when we, this is the story I love to tell too. Jay had a friend that he got to know when he was an auxiliarist, and we became really, really good friends. And the name of their sailboat was the True Love. So what we did is we sailed the boat up from Plymouth up to Weymouth.
We not being me, it was Sally, Pauline, and another auxiliarist. The 3 of them brought the boat up from Plymouth to Weymouth, so it would be there for our wedding day.
Yeah, so it was the girls sailed up from Plymouth, and then the next day Jay and I were on the sailboat, and the others were on 2 other boats, and anchored. And then my dad's boat was the smallest one, so he was the one that did the shuttling back and forth. When we were on the island, it was such a beautiful, gorgeous day. And again, we go back to that energy piece. We didn't get to climb the tower, but the other guests did. But our time came once we were married. There was no impropriety, because at that time it was just a stag, a male billet. So when Jay and I went out there was no impropriety, because we were now married and together. And that opened the door for for other women, a few years to come. And when we had our assistant keepers out there, half of them were male and half are female. That's a question I get asked is, out of the 80 people that were there, what was the ratio? And it was just about 50-50, which was kind of cool. And so once we started doing watches out of Boston Light, this is where we got our idea that we were going to search everything we could find about Boston Light. 5 years of research. And then our friends were saying we should sandwich that between 2 covers, for which we did. Having no idea that this was all going to be leading up to the Boston Light augmentation program, 9/11, and then it being a civilian position, just how that whole thing unfolded.
Yeah.
So once I became the keeper and I was spending great amount of time out there,
Wouldn't you if you could?
Absolutely. I would. I'll just interject that you were nice enough to let me spend a night there on the couch in the keeper's house a few years ago, and it was one of the greatest lighthouse experiences I've had. So I know how magic that place is.
So this is where I got into the energy. And when Jay and I did our first watch after our wedding, a few weeks later, we were going up the 75, 76 spiral stairs, the ladder into the gear room, the ladder into the lantern room, and then we went outside onto the gallery. And I'm not really big about heights, but when I got up there, I remember saying to Jay, I feel like I've done this 1,000 times. And during Jay's and research, we found out that after the Revolutionary War, when the keeper that was out there, his name was Knox, he had a wife and her name was Content. And I don't know what your sense is about reincarnation, but that was the only rational understanding that I could have, that I am a reincarnation of her. And that's why it felt like that I had come home when I was 10 years old. I had already had a previous experience back in 1783, as odd as that should be, but just moving around the island and feeling connected. And our first watch that we did, one of the things that I connected with was the Native American energy. And if you go back into our history of King Philip's War, that the Christianized natives were put on islands with no provisions. They were just put out there. And my impression from what I was reading in my history was that it was in the inner harbor.
Deer Island was the one that gets all the credit for where they were put, but they're historically, they were Indians out on Great Brewster, which Little Brewster is dearly attached at least twice a day.
Yeah.
And so in bygone days, Little Brewster Island was also referred to as the head of Great Brewster Island. And so with the rising tides that we've had, there is it does get exposed at low tide, but back in the 1700s, it was a lot easier to do that transition back and forth. So what I was sensing, but not only with the Native Americans, but also all the people that came across from Europe and perished on the graves, rocks, and the ledges, and the boosters, and how they can get stuck between the two worlds. And through my spiritual trainings, yes, I have a second doctorate. I have a PhD in metaphysical sciences, and one of the things, the trainings that I went through was to help those who are stuck, that have died but haven't passed over to the other side. And that's where we sometimes called them ghosts or what have you, that you see something out of the corner of your eye or you hear rattling or sometimes you actually see an image. Well, these are stuck entities. So what I started doing just in a natural way before I even had my doctorate. I graduated in 2015, but I was already doing this intuitively. And so through the years, the clarity, how the island feels in the outer harbor, to freeing all these stuck souls, it's a much more, it's like benevolent energy there now.
Some of the listeners might enjoy learning what your second master's was in.
For this metaphysical training that I did, I had to do a bachelor's, a master's, and the doctorate. So I have 2 bachelors, two of everything. So what was the significance of my master's?
It was in Egyptology.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Some of the listeners might just enjoy that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Specialties is Egyptian, what's the
mythology.
second? Yeah, Egyptian mythology. And I've been to Egypt and done really nifty things like gone to the Sphinx, with the paws.
Yeah.
And we was a small group, about 16 of us, and we meditated down there. And it was the park, or that area had an open jet. And when I was done with my meditation, I opened my eyes up, and there must have been like 1,000 people looking at us down at the Sphinx.
Wow.
Other thing that we got to do is in the Great Pyramid, there's a low, and they don't let the general public do that, but we could. And it's a very tiny space. You had to crunch down, and you're going downhill. And just to be there and do meditation there, and I got to lay in the
sarcophagus.
Yeah, the sarcophagus. I mean,
wow.
just the energies that I've had. And then I went with another spiritual trip to Tunisia, and lived with nomads in the desert for 10 days, riding a camel every day. Oh, that was so cool. And then I've been down to Peru, to Lake Titicaca, and actually got to stay overnight on Sun Island. So all these connections that I have. And the other thing that I love is toning, chanting, and an acoustic environment. And there's people that travel the world to go to caves and sites and things like that, specifically to do their toning. Boston Light, that's what it is, toning all the time. And I think, so privileged, I don't have to go anywhere, just go into the tower and start toning or drumming or rattling.
I just thought of something I think you'd really love. I did a podcast episode about it quite a while ago, but there's a lighthouse in London and England. You don't expect there's going to be a lighthouse there because it's near the Thames, but it was never an aid to navigation. It was built for experiments. Michael Faraday, the famous electrician, did experiments there, among others. So anyway, it's just referred to as a Trinity House lighthouse there. This guy named Jem Finer, who used to be in the rock band the Pogues, and Shane MacGowan, the singer for the Pogues, just died yesterday, just coincidentally. But anyway, he created this musical installation in this lighthouse that uses ancient Tibetan singing bowls. I don't know if you've heard about this, but he created a piece of music that's supposed to play for 1,000 years before it repeats itself. He designed like a computer program to play this music with these singing bowls, but they can also do live demonstrations. There's a set of singing bowls in there. I was there by myself. They gave me the key to the lighthouse when I was there last year. I went in and sat up in the lantern room by myself and listened to this music. It was one of the most incredible experiences. I think you'd really appreciate that. Jay, you're holding what I think is a speaker there. What's this all about? Oh, that's a bowl. I couldn't make it out. I was seeing it at cross section.
I didn't make it anywhere near that.
Yeah. So you have a singing bowl.
A few.
We have a number of them, yes.
Okay. So I don't know if you know about this installation I'm talking about, Sally, but it's something
I have not heard it, but we did do a spiritual journey Jay went with me on this one, and there's a ley line that cross over Serpentine,
The
Michael
southwest
and
end
Mary,
of England.
and
Uh-huh.
we just did ceremony for the whole 2 weeks of that on, a bus trip, just following that line up to Avery. So we have had experiences like that in this very room that
Yeah.
we're in. I have a private practice. It's called the Harmonic Sanctuary of Enlightenment, and I'm going to turn the
Don't
screen
get dizzy.
for you to see what we have.
Yeah. And people listening won't see this, but you've got
You can
these
touch it.
different kinds of drums and percussion things around the room. Wow. It's like a museum of spiritual instruments or whatever I don't know how you refer to them, but
Yeah.
Yeah, and then one
Mhm.
of our newest add-on is
You have a gong there. I see that.
yeah,
Wow.
that's our newest.
Yeah, I knew you were into the drumming and stuff, but I guess I didn't quite realize the extent. But that's great. But listening to all this, you've really had quite a life. And being keeper of Boston Light for 20 years is just one chapter in that life. So you've got to write that book.
Yeah.
And it may I don't know if you've thought about who's going to play you in the Netflix series about your life, but maybe you should start.
And I have one little other tidbit to share with you. Not only do I do the sound healing piece, but I'm a yoga teacher. And this is one of the other things that I have done. I finished the training in 2017. And there's many flavors of Kundalini yoga, and I chose Kundalini yoga because when I was surfing the net to see what the different flavors were, because I've been doing yoga for years, but not any particular flavor. And for Kundalini yoga, it was described as that we are all beacons of light. We are all lighthouses. And that was it. Sign me up.
A lot of chanting and toning involved
Well,
too.
and that was the other thing, because I wanted to get into the chanting and the meditation.
You've probably done a lot of chanting and meditating and all kinds of things at Boston Light. What a perfect place for all that.
Yeah, in fact, I think maybe 5 times got permission from the Park Service at the end of the season when the enrollment on the boats was lower, that and Sundays were typically the lower, that we would have a Sunday, and not me as the keeper, I had helpers help me with this, to have a sacred journey to Boston Light. So they took care of all the arrangements, getting the ferry boat. The charge for this event, it was only to pay for the transportation, and I had nothing to do with that. And so they would come on the island, and we'd have typically around 30, and we'd be doing the toning in the drumming in the tower. And one of the things that I do, I also studied Native American traditions. And then there's the very, very old labyrinths. So I laid that out superimposed with 36 rocks for the medicine wheel. And then we'd be walking in and out of that. And we made it so it was almost the full width of the island going up toward the tower. And so everybody would just get into their own little space in time, and then they'd go back on the boat. It happened all the time that it was just about sunset. So they were heading back to the mainland. And it was so wonderful that the Park Service allowed that to happen. And because this was Native American, that was the key that said, yeah, sure. And it said, if any of the rangers want to come, just let us know, and we will, arrange transportation, but they all worked, so they couldn't come. So when I say that, this is another topic about the stones, the etchings in the stones, that is tradition in lighthouses. And the question I get asked all the time is, Sally, where are your initials, or where are you going to put your initials? And it's like, I don't have to leave my initials anywhere. I have 29 years of Sally energy.
And that's there forever. Absolutely. Yeah. Your presence is going to be there for forever and ever and ever. I was thinking back to, you're talking about, you felt possibly the reincarnation of the wife of the keeper there, Keeper Knox. Content was her first name. What a great name. But you also, Jay, didn't you do some research that there's actually a relation to
in doing genealogy research? There's two of the keepers out at Boston Light that are distant relatives of Sally, one being Keeper Tower and the other Keeper Bates. And then we told you the other night that Sally had one of the Snowman aunts was married to the keeper of Pumpkin Island Light on the western end of Eggemogan Reach. And his name was Snow.
What is the origin of the name Snowman? Where does that?
The furthest back is, I think, about 1630. There was this Christian snowman came over from England, and then shortly thereafter headed up toward Maine. So I don't know, but the other thing is there was an old sailing vessel style that was actually called a snow, was the name of the sailing vessel. So whether that had any part to do with it or not, I don't know.
Somebody who was a skipper of one of those vessels, the Snow, might have been called a snowman, right? Yeah, interesting.
There are a number of Sally's ancestors going as short as her dad had a 100-ton Coast Guard license. So there were a number of the family going back for generations that were involved in sailing in the sea.
I once had a captain's license, but when I got the job, I couldn't get my underway time, so that lapsed. But I would have been the last snowman with a captain's license forever.
Wow, interesting. Sally, let me ask you, we're speaking on November 30th. A month from now, or a little over a month from now, at the end of the year, you will be retired from your job at Boston Light. What are you going to do after you're retired?
Hopefully she'll take some time to decompress.
Yeah, I hope so.
I'm so busy working at tying up loose ends, and I had no idea how many loose ends there are. And we're at the end of November and go, oh my goodness gracious, I only have 31 more days to do whatever I have to do. So I really haven't seriously thought about that yet. However, I'm always going to be busy.
Yeah.
I can go my Sanctuary of Enlightenment.
Our neighbor Dave Waller has said she can come out and clean his first lens anytime she wants.
For people listening, some people know what that means, but you're of course referring to Dave being the owner of Graves Lighthouse. That's how far apart are they? Is it 3 miles apart from each other? It's only 2.
It's 2 miles.
But they're sort of siblings in outer Boston Harbor, Graves Light being the much younger sibling, although people look at it and think it's more ancient. But anyway, yeah, I just was corresponding with Dave today. Yeah, I think you're one of those people, you'll always be busy. I'm sort of the same way. I tend to do too many things at once. And when I complain about it to my wife, Charlotte, she says, well, that's what you do. I'm not gonna change. So I understand that. I'm gonna ask you both a final question, okay? This one's for bonus points, all right? And Sally, I think I asked you this question when you were on the podcast before, but you can, you might give the same answer, you might give a different answer, whatever comes into your head. But what has been and Jay, I want to ask you too a different version of this question. In fact, why don't I start with you, Jay? What has been your favorite thing about your association with Boston Light over the years?
I think just being out on the island is just such a privilege. I mean, you know, from your one night out there, but can you imagine multiplying that by the number of times? Is just fascinating, and you can tell from our book that we're both into history, and it's pretty hard not to be into history when you're out on that island.
Absolutely. It is an absolutely magic place. I've been out there many times during the day, only that one night, but I've certainly experienced it enough to understand what an absolutely amazing, special place it is. So, Sally, what has been your favorite thing about your years of association with Boston Light?
It is magical. I just love being out there with the ocean around me, all around me, and it just listening, closing my eyes and hearing what's happening all around, the wind whipping around the tower or what have you. And it's all nature stuff that's pulling at my heartstrings right now. The sunrises and the sundowns, and I drum the sundown. And so for some of the auxiliaries, that's, like, whoa, what's she doing? And they either go to another part of the island or they go in the house, and others will come out, and because I have other drums and rattles, and they can join in with me if they want. But that's the way of waking up in the morning and greeting the sun, and then bringing closure at night. And it's just not that way in Weymouth, Massachusetts. I could look out of my bedroom window and I can see the sunset behind the trees, but you can't see it actually going down.
Yeah.
Where Boston, 8 miles away, is just dropping behind the city. And then the sun rises, it's coming right over the Atlantic Ocean with no obstruction whatsoever.
I think in our everyday lives, a lot of us have lost a lot of that connection to nature. I mean, people working in offices and so forth. It's not the same as being on an island, obviously. And, I think through the years when there were lighthouse keepers living at these places, yeah, it was a hard job. It was a dangerous job. It didn't pay very well, et cetera, et cetera. But I think for the most part, they also loved it. And I think that was the main thing that they loved about it, was just that connection to the planet and the ocean and the sky and everything else.
I have another story.
Mhm.
Because I love nature, and the gulls would fly over me when I come to the island. It's really kind of cool. And when I'm leaving the island, and we were doing a change of watch. So I was leaving the island and 2 people were coming on board. And so I'm coming down the dock with all my gear, and the birds are flying over me, and they're going, car, car, car. So I'm going, car, car, car. And the auxiliarist comes over to me. She said, "You definitely have to get off at this island." But
Yeah.
they don't even realize what I'm doing. I just get into that whole thing. It is just so cool when I'm come to the island to have the gulls flying
Yeah.
around.
Well, I think you start to feel that there's no line between you and the universe, right? It's all one.
One of the enjoyable things I had the privilege to do was Charles Morgan came up to visit Boston when they
The whaling ship,
got
yeah.
the whaling ship, and she was under sail coming in Nantasket Roads, and it was just amazing to see. Of course, I didn't have a camera with me, but and she sailed through the Narrows. It was definitely a memorable sight.
I would think so. Yeah. Wow. Wow. And you must have so many memorable sights over the years. And those all have to be in the book. So I'm looking forward to that. Sally and Jay, we could talk for hours. We have kind of talked for hours, especially if you take into account last night and tonight. But I love hearing it all. And we'll do it again. Maybe we can revisit sometime down the road and see how you are enjoying your retirement. Maybe have you on the podcast talking about what it's like to be retired, maybe looking back some more. But thank you so much for spending this time with me, Sally and Jay. And again, I don't want to keep apologizing, but sorry about what happened last night. But thank you for being so understanding, or for doing a second take on this. It was great. The part that didn't get recorded last night was great, but this was just as great, if not better. So thank you so much. And again, I share your love of Boston Light. I completely understand it. And I wish you all the best in your retirement, Sally. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks at the retirement party. I don't think they're calling it a party. Is it a gathering? Is that the official name? A gathering.
It's a small gathering.
Yeah, well, I'm very much looking forward to that. So again, thank you so much, Sally and Jay, and good luck with everything. Take care.
Thank you.
There have been no tours of Boston Light for several years, but there is a narrated cruise you can take from Boston that goes near Boston Light and Graves Light. Go to bostonharborislands.org to learn more.
As you can tell from the interview, Sally is a very interesting person who's had an amazing journey in her life. Besides being a lighthouse keeper, she's done many important things to help people educationally and spiritually. But I know Boston Light is very close to her heart.
Check out uslhs.org to learn about preservation grants, the research catalog, and all the things the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers. Remember that donations and memberships help to support this podcast. If you listen using Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us.
Do you have a quote for the holiday season, Cindy?
Yes, I do. The humorist Dave Barry once wrote, quote, "Once again, we come to the holiday season, a deeply religious time that each of us observes in his own way by going to the mall of his choice," unquote.
Well, all joking aside, we wish the very best to everyone for Hanukkah, Christmas, or whatever you celebrate.
Yes, we do.
With that, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and
keep a good light.
Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.